This week we are reading a Parashat Naso. Actually has a lot of really beautiful Torah in it. It starts slow. It starts with the census, the continuation of the census and the counting of the Levites. But then it moves into some really interesting things. It has what we looked at yesterday, the rules around removing people from the camp when they are impure, and so has a very communal safety focus to it. It includes the laws of the sota, of the woman who is accused of infidelity, and the ritual with the red heifer that goes along with that. Mariuch, you made it.
I was having problems.
Yeah, I know. He kept saying having trouble connecting to audio. We were waiting, and just as we gave up, here you are. So it has the rules of the sota. It has in it also the rules of the Nazarite, the person who takes a vow not to cut their hair, not to drink any intoxicating beverages or even grape juice, not to come near any corpses for any reason, for most of them for a discrete period of time. Although in our Haftarah we read about the most famous Nazarite, Samson. We read about his birth as prophesied to his mother from an angel. And it has also in it a lot of gifts brought to the tabernacle and the priestly blessing. So there's a lot of really beautiful material in this week's Torah portion, and I'm actually going to talk about absolutely none of it. So all of my attention this week, all of my thoughts this week, and all of my reading this week has been having to do with what's going on in the world around us, what's going on in our country, even down to Pelham. There is a nightly vigil at Wolf's Lane Park at 8 p.m. In solidarity with the protesters and in memory of George Floyd. So this is just where my head is at this week, and so this is what I wanted to talk about. So I'm going to share my screen, and what I'm actually really hoping is that the texts that I have here are something that we can engage in and have a conversation around. I'm more than happy to talk about them and to expound, but I think that there would be a great deal of value in us seeing how these texts do and don't apply to this current moment in our lives. So I encourage even more than usual participation and discussion. All right, everyone sees Naso with this cool ribbon. Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So the first thing I want to say is somewhere between a disclaimer and actually something that might undermine my entire point. But I think it's important to say, which is the Torah doesn't have one opinion that you can look at this and say, well, the Torah obviously says X, or the Torah obviously says Y. The Torah is on the side of the protesters. The Torah is on the side of law and order. The Torah argues for this or for that. And anyone who says to you that the Torah clearly argues for this is selectively choosing what they read. And I'm going to selectively choose what we're going to look at. But I think it's very important that we do this with the humility to understand that the Torah can be interpreted to say any of a variety of things. And so the way that I want to demonstrate that is with two texts at the very beginning. This first one is a source that I shared with you in the letter that I wrote and sent out earlier this week. This is from the Mishnah in Sanhedrin, and is a very famous text that talks about the value of human beings. It's in the same context that we have the admonition that anyone who saves a life, it's as if they saved the world, and anyone who kills a person, it's as if they destroyed an entire world. This comes in that context. And all of that is in the context of witnesses in capital cases. So someone who comes in and really has the power of life and death over someone else. That if their testimony is believed and their testimony says a certain thing, that someone else is going to lose their life as a result. And so the rabbis believed that judges had to instill the weight of that responsibility on all of the witnesses who come before them. And so they admonish them. And one of the admonitions goes all the way back to the creation of Adam, the creation of that first human being. And the rabbis write, "It is for this reason that Adam was created alone, for the sake of peace among humankind, that one should not say to another, 'My father was greater than yours.'" Because, of course, if we go back far enough, the rabbis are telling us everyone's father is the same person. We're all descended from that same person. And so there is no lineage that is more noble, that is better, that is smarter, that is faster, that is anything than anyone else. And the differences, therefore, that separate us have to be much smaller. So if we were to take this text in isolation, how could we apply this to the current moment in our lives? A quick thought, anyone?
I think immediately of white supremacy.
So as an argument against it,
Yeah.
right? This is not a text that would be beloved by the white supremacists.
Yeah, especially since they're the ones who say they're all like Bible thumping, blah, 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 supposedly.
Yes, so if we take this text, right, if this text is the foundation of how we engage with racial issues, how we engage with issues between communities, this is one that forces us to recognize that what connects us to one another is much more important and much more significant than what divides us. The next text, however, is going to be much more beloved by the white supremacists. So this is also from Genesis, just 8 chapters later. But this is Noah. After the flood, he comes down onto land. Something happens between him and his son Ham. The Torah doesn't tell us exactly what, but something happens where inappropriate between them. And we read that when Noah woke up from his wine, he got drunk, and learned what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, Ham's son. The lowest of slaves shall he be to his brother." And so this text definitely gives us a different sense of the relationship amongst people. We're no longer looking at the question of equality. So what would this...
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, this isn't a matter of being born into a lesser status. This is because this is almost being punished for your bad acts.
Yes and yes.
Yes.
So for Ham, this is absolutely a punishment, right? And so we can get behind that. We can say, well, you've done something wrong, and so therefore you're going to be punished. You're going to have some amount of servitude. This is actually has historically and to this day is a common piece of a legal punishment, is you have to pay a fine or you have to work off your debt, whatever that is. Absolutely. However, Mark, if you look at it, it's not the one who did whatever inappropriate act this was who is actually being punished, but rather his son. His son is the one who's
particularly his son Canaan, though, which seems more like an editorial gloss.
May or may not be
a little
I don't want to dive too deeply into biblical criticism in this moment. We can certainly spend a lot of time on that another time. But his son, well, so much, if not all, of the figures in the book of Genesis end up being the namesakes of nations that exist later in Tanakh. So we have Canaan, we have Edom, we have Israel, we have all of this. So every nation is seen to be descended from one person who is the progenitor of that nation. And so now we have Canaan, who is the ancestor of the people who live in Canaan. But what's important here, and the way that this ends up getting used, is to say that but the fact that this was a punishment given to Ham for something that he did wrong, but it was a punishment that was given not only to him, but to his descendants, it can justify the differences between people. And it was used exactly that way. This was used by slaveholders. This was used by slave traders. This idea that there is a nation, a race almost in this world who is condemned by Noah and through Noah by God to a different status, a lower status, can be considered a strong justification for slavery. And we see that not only from slave owners, not only from white supremacists, but we also see that from Rabbi Dr. Morris J. Rafal, who was the rabbi of Bnei Jeshurun in New York City, BJ, as it exists today. He, in fact, used this verse to argue that, look, while I don't agree with slavery myself, I wouldn't certainly own any slaves, I can't actually argue, he's saying, that slavery is against Judaism. Slavery has, looking at this, he says, existed since the earliest of times, that it's no sin, and that it is in fact, and he's not wrong about this, protected under one of the Ten Commandments, when we're told not to covet in the Ten Commandments, that your neighbor's slave is one of the categories that you should not covet. And that but he does go at least a little bit in the direction of rights. The slave is a person and has no rights, and has rights not conflicting with the lawful exercise of the rights of his owner. So there are rights that belong to the slave, according to this rabbi. However, it doesn't include a right of freedom and of not being enslaved. So I bring this up. Obviously, this is a text that would be much favored by those white supremacists who would have been so opposed to the text from the Mishnah on the previous page. And I bring this up to illustrate the point that I was making earlier, that the Torah can and is used to make contradictory claims and contradictory value judgments. So much so that in the Talmud, the rabbis said that only a person to make it onto the Sanhedrin, onto the high court of Jewish law, you had to be able to prove that you could render the carcass of a creeping animal pure according to Torah law. Something the Torah explicitly says anyone who touches this thing is made impure. Before you can make it onto the high court, you need to be able to demonstrate a facility with the law, the ability to connect it and to move it around in any way so that it is considered pure.
That does not sound like a approval rating there. That sounds a little bit of a criticism. That Rav Yehuda's comment sounds like they only would put somebody on the Supreme Court who could, use the law to.
So it could be.
Right?
That's not how I read it, but I can see what you're saying. I read it really just as a knowledge and a skill.
Oh, knowledge. Okay.
Not one who would choose to do that necessarily, but one who, if I so wanted to, I could.
Okay, you're so knowledgeable.
But I do see it that way, and to bolster your point, I think we're looking at this is taking place. Rav Yehuda and Rav are Babylonian rabbis in the time of after the time of the Mishnah. Rav is the first generation of rabbis in the Babylonian Talmud. So this is a group of people who probably have a little bit of tension with the court system as it exists in the land of Israel, that they are feeling a bit of inferiority. And so I can actually see that existing exactly as you're saying, where there's also a little bit after really the heyday of the Sanhedrin, so they're not necessarily afraid of it. So I could see them wanting to argue, well, look, that Sanhedrin, it really wasn't so great. Those people were doing all sorts of crazy things. I think that that's a viable read, but it's not the way that I read it.
Is the English word slave a fair translation of the Hebrew word? In terms of we think of slave, a certain way, and is that really the same thing?
Certainly, I think that slavery in the Torah was a different thing than slavery in the United States. I think that, however, in the Torah and according to rabbinic law later, there was a divide between the way that slavery was understood for Israelites, for Jews, and slavery for non-Jews. So several weeks ago, we looked at the laws of the Yovel, and the 7 years and the Shemitah year, right? And so an Israelite slave would be let go at both of those moments. So it was really much more of an indentured servitude than a slavery in the way that we think of it. However, I think a point that does compare it is, as we see elsewhere in the Torah, when you have a slave, there's all the laws of a person who doesn't want to be freed from their servitude at the end of the 7-year period, and they go and their ear gets pierced at the doorpost, which is consistently read as a condemnation of that decision to remain a slave. The rabbis all argue that this is saying that it's better to be free. But in that context, the children of slaves are also slaves, which is the same way that it worked in the United States in times of slavery. So I think there are comparisons, but it's definitely not identical.
But what about the Shabbat law that protects the animals, the slaves, everybody had Shabbat.
Yes, everyone had Shabbat. So yes, certainly there are differences. Certainly there were restrictions placed on how a person could treat their slave in the Torah. And so that is definitely an improvement over the way that slaves were treated in the United States. So I think it probably depends on what specific points you're choosing to compare it to, how you're choosing to look at it, and whether you're choosing to look at Israelite slaves or non-Israelite slaves. I think that all makes a difference. So all of this was introduction, and it was a much too long introduction, so I now only have 10 minutes for the meat of this conversation. So we're going to move into this very quickly so that we can actually look at it. So this is a text from Shabbat, the Masechet Shabbat, that I have turned to a great deal. Anyone who has the capability to
it hasn't begun yet. They're finishing up a class.
Effectively protest the sinful conduct of the members of their household and did not protest is liable for the sins of the members of this household. With regard to the members of the town, they're liable for the sins of the people of the town. With regard to the sins of the whole world, they are liable for the sins of the whole world. So this text, I think, gives us both an obligation to protest, but also an exemption in the way that it's interpreted, right? If I have the ability to impact, right? It's that word effectively that I think is the most important in this text. If I can really make a difference by going out and protesting, whatever that looks like, right? In my household, I'm not going to be standing on a picket line with a sign, but I'll be telling my children, you shouldn't do this thing, it's against halakha. That's exactly how I talk to my children. If I have that ability and they will listen to me, then I share in the liability for that act. If I can shout to high heavens about my neighbors doing barbecuing on Saturday, and I know my neighbors are Jewish, and I know they're going to continue to ignore me, then this effectiveness kicks in, and suddenly I don't share that liability. And the same is true for my town, for my city, for my general area, and for the entire world. If you have the ability to make an impact on the world and you choose not to, you choose to sit back and say it's not my problem, then you are liable as if you were the one doing the sinning yourself.
So does that translate to voting today? Like if you sit back and you don't vote, would that be like this?
Would voting be considered?
So voting today is like protesting the sinful conduct of.
I think yes. I think anything, at least the way that I'm reading this, and I don't have. I would want to look at almost a dictionary definition of this Hebrew word limchot. To see if it is restrictive or expansive. But I think the way that I would read this right now is anything that I could do to lessen this sinful conduct, whatever that might be. If I have the chance of it being effective, then I need to do it. Me standing in my bedroom shouting is not an effective way to make change. So I have no obligation to stand in my bedroom and shout. But I think, yes, I think you could make an argument that voting is exactly that. You could also, though, based on the way that our electoral college functions, argue that if I believed that if I lived in one state, I don't want to get too deeply into politics itself, but if I lived in a state that was always green and I wanted it to be purple, I'm intentionally making up colors, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I know that 75% of the state is all green, then my voting purple is not an effective way for me to make change. Because I know that it won't make a difference. This is the every vote counts, but not every vote matters idea. And the silliness of our electoral college, but we're not going to go in that direction. So this text has always been, I've been familiar with this text for a very long time, and I've used it both as a motivation to speak out and also a recognition at times or a permission to be quiet when I don't feel like I would actually make a difference. And it gives me that permission to sit and not kill myself for something that won't make a difference. But this week I came across this text, which comes on the following page in the Talmud. And here we see, I'm very behind on time, a complication. So Rabbi Acha, the son of Rabbi Hanina, said, never did a promise manifesting a good attribute emerge from the mouth of the Holy Blessed One, that God later retracted and rendered it evil. So if God breaks a promise for something to be good, it will always be good. God never changes God's mind. And so we have this in the text of Ezekiel, we see, and the Lord said to him, go through the city and through the midst of Jerusalem and set a mark, a tav, upon the foreheads of the men that sigh and that cry on account of all the abominations that are done in their midst. The people who are upset about the sins in their city and the sins in Jerusalem, they are all going to get this mark on their head and they will be spared the destruction that is to come. If you aren't actively participating, God is saying, I will spare you from the destruction. So the Holy One, the Gemara is going to explain, the Holy Blessed One said to Gabriel, go and inscribe a tav of ink on the foreheads of the righteous, so the angels of destruction will not have dominion over them, and a tav of blood on the foreheads of the wicked, so the angels of destruction will have dominion over them. This is the Passover mezuzah and the blood on the lintel, but on each of our heads. And then it continues. The attribute of justice, this idea, this exemplification of justice stands up and says before God, how are these different from those? God says these ones, the ones with the tav of ink, are fully righteous, and those ones are fully wicked. But justice says to God, Master of the universe, it was in the hands of those righteous people to protest, and they didn't. God says, that's okay. I know, it's revealed and known before me, that even had they protested, they would not have accepted it from them. So they would have been, as that previous text had said, they would have been exempted from the obligation to protest because they wouldn't have made a difference. Justice then turns to God. And this is the powerful moment for me. Master of the universe, if it's revealed before you, do they know that? Can they actually know that their protests won't have an impact? And this, to me, is the challenge that I'm feeling in this moment, is I can feel like my actions won't have any impact and they won't have any contact. And I might be right? I could be out there every day, every night, marching and shouting and inserting myself and trying to do everything that I can, and it will make no perceptible difference whatsoever. On the other hand, at some point, tipping points are reached, and no one can know when that is until after the fact. And so, how can I say with certainty that I won't have an impact? And if I can't say with certainty, justice is saying, if I can't know that I wouldn't have impacted the world around me, then how can I say it wasn't my responsibility to act and to sit back, that I share in that liability? So this verse here, or this passage here is pushing us to speak out all of the time. So, okay, we'll end with this. This is where we'll end. So this is actually also in Shabbat, but a different section, a different subject. This is actually having to do with the revelation at Sinai on Shavuot, so timely in that way. There's this beautiful moment, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says, when Moses ascended on high, the ministering angels hated it. The angels are often very, very jealous of us. They think we are such great worshipers of God. Why does humanity get such love? Why does God like us so much when the angels are so much better? They never sin. They never fail. They're worshiping God 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. How can it be that God gives us the Torah? And so the ministering angels say before the Holy One, blessed be he, master of the universe, why is one born of a woman among us? And God, in, I guess, good teacherly fashion, turns to Moses and says, Moses, answer them. Tell them why you deserve to be up here and the angels are wrong and you deserve to get the Torah. Moses turns to God. Master of the universe, I'm afraid lest they burn me with the breath of their mouths. The angels are angry. They are powerful. They have the ability to cause me real harm. And God said to him, grasp my throne of glory and provide them with an answer. That God will in some way protect Moses from the danger that he faces in speaking out. And Moses will in that way be able to answer the angels and to make that change happen. And for me, I think that this is a really important concept. This is a really important idea that we, in our safety, and we are very safe right now, we in our safety have an obligation to use some of that privilege to help those who are risking themselves to speak out. We need to be able to the extent that we can, help others to be safe, help others to get their voices heard, and to do it in a way that they are not in danger of this burning breath from the angels in the language of Moses. And so this is a weighty obligation. Not only do we have the obligation to call out sin as we see it, to call out the wrongdoings that we see in the world, we also have an obligation to protect others who are doing the same thing. We need to be able to give everyone the opportunity to speak that truth and to be heard. And if we have the ability to protect them as they do that, then that becomes our obligation as well. And I will be honest as I conclude here, this is challenging for me. This idea of figuring out how I can, with everything else that is happening in the world and everything else that is happening in my life, which is true for each and every one of us, how can I be effective in this moment? And I don't know the answer. And it's something that I'm struggling with and something that I'm working on, how I can speak out and support and amplify the voices that need to be amplified. And so I'm working to find those answers for myself. But I think doing that work is an important first step for me. And I want to conclude by encouraging everyone to do that work as well, to figure out what it is that you can do to eradicate sin in this world, to eradicate the sins that we see happening around us, to protect those who are speaking out against it, and to amplify that voice of righteousness, to amplify that voice that demands action and demands change, so that we can live in a world that is safer and that is free. Shabbat shalom.